Between clumsy simulations, chaotic sessions, and an overly dramatic family, a simple seduction training turns into a full-blown experiment in emotional disaster. But sometimes, the messiest moments lead to the most unexpected discoveries. Grace Hartley had seen every type of disaster walk through her studio door. Men who confused compliments with interrogations. Women who treated first dates like business negotiations. But the man sitting across from her, spine rigid as a lamppost and expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else, was a new category entirely. Thomas Ashford, billionaire, aviation magnate, emotional disaster. "So," Grace began, crossing her legs and fixing him with the kind of smile that usually made clients relax, "you're here because you want to improve your communication skills in romantic contexts. That's wonderful. Self-awareness is the first step." "I'm here," Thomas corrected, his voice clipped and efficient, "because I need to acquire a specific skill set to achieve a predetermined objective." Grace blinked. Behind her, Martin Clark, her assistant and the most theatrical human being ever to fail a West End audition, made a choking sound that he tried to disguise as a cough. "Acquire a skill set," Grace repeated slowly. "To achieve an objective." "Correct." Thomas pulled out a tablet, and Grace's eye twitched. "The target individual values spontaneity, emotional availability, and what she terms authentic connection. I've analyzed her social media presence, attended 4 networking events where she was present, and determined that my current approach is ineffective." "The target individual." Grace's voice had gone very quiet. Martin, who knew that tone, took 3 careful steps backward. Thomas didn't notice. "Yes, Rebecca Ashford. No relation, despite the surname coincidence. She's a curator at the Tate Modern, 34 years old, graduated from Cambridge with honours in art history. Her favourite flower is apparently the peony, though I fail to see how that's relevant to professional compatibility." "You researched her like she's a merger acquisition." "Naturally. Thorough preparation is essential for any successful venture. If this story is touching your heart, show your support, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion." Grace leaned forward, her dark eyes flashing with something between amusement and horror. "Mr. Ashford, romance isn't a venture. It's not a spreadsheet. You can't optimize your way into someone's heart." "Why not?" He looked genuinely confused. "Every system can be improved through data analysis and strategic implementation." "Because love isn't a system." Grace could feel her professional composure slipping. This man was going to be either the most entertaining or the most infuriating client she'd ever had. Possibly both. "It's messy and irrational and inefficient," Thomas finished, "which is precisely why I'm here, to make it efficient." Martin gasped so dramatically that both of them turned to look at him. He clutched his chest as if he'd been shot. Did this man just call love inefficient? "Martin," Grace warned. "No, Grace, this is sacrilege. This is—" Martin swept across the room, his purple scarf billowing behind him like he was in a Renaissance painting. "Sir, with all due respect, you cannot optimize passion. You cannot create a PowerPoint presentation for the human heart." "I don't use PowerPoint," Thomas said. "It's outdated. I prefer data visualization through—" "Oh my God," Martin breathed. "Grace, he's serious. He's actually serious." Grace pinched the bridge of her nose. Her studio, usually a cheerful space filled with motivational posters and soft lighting, suddenly felt very small. The bright yellow walls that usually calmed her clients now seemed to be mocking her. She'd written an entire book about communication. She'd helped hundreds of people express their feelings. And here sat a man who treated emotions like software bugs that needed patching. But Grace Hartley didn't back down from challenges. In fact, she loved them. "All right, Mr. Ashford." She sat up straighter, that competitive spark igniting in her chest. "Let's start with something simple. Tell me about the last time you felt truly happy." Thomas frowned. "Define happy." "You can't—" Grace stopped herself, took a breath. "Happy, joyful, content. That warm feeling when something good happens." He considered this with the intensity most people reserved for solving quantum physics. Last quarter, Ashford Aviation exceeded projected revenue by 18%. That was satisfactory. Satisfactory, Grace echoed. Yes, not happy. Satisfactory. Happiness is subjective, and therefore unreliable as a metric. Martin made a sound like a wounded animal. Grace stared at Thomas Ashford, at his perfectly pressed suit, his expensive watch, his complete and utter inability to understand that he'd just revealed the saddest thing she'd heard all month. Something shifted in her chest. Annoyance, yes, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or perhaps just the stubborn determination to prove that even a man who spoke in metrics could learn to speak in feelings. Mr. Ashford, she said carefully, I'm going to take your case. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't going to be like your business deals. You're going to have to trust me even when nothing I say makes logical sense to you. Can you do that? Thomas met her eyes for the first time since sitting down. They were blue, she noticed. Sharp and analytical, but not unkind. Just lost. I can try, he said. Good. Grace smiled, and it wasn't her professional smile anymore. It was her, I'm going to enjoy proving you wrong smile. Because, Mr. Ashford, you're about to get a crash course in something that can't be measured, analyzed, or controlled. What's that? Being human. Martin applauded. Actually applauded. Thomas looked between them like they were speaking a foreign language. This, Grace thought with growing amusement, was going to be interesting. Thomas had attended thousands of meetings in his life, board meetings, investor presentations, international negotiations. He'd purchased 3 airlines, restructured 2 airport operations, and once convinced a Dubai sheikh to part with a vintage aircraft for half its market value. None of that had prepared him for Grace Hartley's first assignment. You want me to... What? He stared at the card she'd just handed him. Compliment a stranger. A genuine, thoughtful compliment. Not about their productivity or their ROI. Grace leaned back in her chair, looking far too pleased with herself. You have until our next session. That's not a measurable objective. Life isn't always measurable, Mr. Ashford. It should be. Grace's lips twitched. Thomas noticed they were a very specific shade of rose. Not that it was relevant. It was simply an observation. He observed things. It was what made him good at business. May I ask, he said carefully, how this relates to winning Rebecca's attention? You may not. Grace stood, signaling the end of their session. She was shorter than he'd expected, probably 5'4" in the heels she wore. Her dress was green, a deep emerald that made her eyes look darker. Again, merely an observation. You said you'd trust the process. Was that a lie? Something about the way she said it, with that slight arch of her eyebrow, made Thomas bristle. He didn't lie. Ever. It was inefficient. I don't lie. Good. Then compliment a stranger. See you Thursday. Martin appeared from nowhere, holding Thomas's coat with a flourish that seemed entirely unnecessary. This way to your doom. I mean, your vehicle, Mr. Ashford. Thomas took his coat. Are you always this dramatic? Are you always this robotic? Martin shot back, then gasped at his own audacity. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean... It's fine. Thomas headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, your dramatic tendencies are noticeable, but not entirely ineffective. He left. Martin stood frozen in place. Grace, Martin whispered, still staring at the closed door. Did the robot just try to compliment me? Grace was staring at the door too, a strange expression on her face. I think he did. Should I feel honored or concerned? Both, Grace murmured. Definitely both. Earth to eyes. But 2 days later, Thomas stood in the lobby of his company's headquarters, watching employees rush past with coffee cups and briefcases. He'd been standing there for 40 minutes. The compliment card was in his pocket, and he still hadn't completed the assignment. This was absurd. He could negotiate million-pound contracts in 3 languages. He could identify an aircraft's model from its engine sound alone. But apparently he couldn't tell a stranger something nice without calculating the most efficient approach first. A woman walked past, young, probably mid-20s, carrying what appeared to be architectural plans. Her hair was falling out of its clip. She looked stressed. Your organizational system for those documents is visually efficient, Thomas heard himself say. The woman stopped, stared at him. What? The way you've arranged those plans, the color coding. It's Efficient. She looked down at her plans, then back at him, her expression morphing from confusion to suspicion. Are you being sarcastic? No, I'm attempting a compliment. Attempting? Her voice rose. Listen, buddy, I don't know what kind of weird corporate hazing this is, but I've had 3 hours of sleep and my boss just rejected my design for the 5th time. If you're making fun of me, I'm not. Thomas realized he'd made a critical error. I apologize. That was inappropriate. You think? She stormed off, muttering something about lawyers. Thomas stood there, surrounded by his employees who were now definitely staring. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. How's the assignment going? GH. How did she get his number? He'd specifically asked his assistant not to share it with anyone outside his approved contact list. Another text arrived before he could respond. Your PA gave it to me. Don't be annoyed with her. I'm very persuasive. Thomas could picture Grace's expression as she wrote that little smile she got when she thought she'd won something. He typed back, the assignment is proceeding with expected challenges. Translation, you've failed miserably, haven't you? Thomas frowned at his phone. Was he that transparent? It's not failure, it's data collection. Sure it is. Try again. And Thomas? This time, maybe don't use the word efficient when talking to people about non-business matters. Noted. He pocketed his phone, that strange warmth in his chest returning. The one that appeared whenever Grace challenged him or looked at him like he was a puzzle she was determined to solve. It was probably acid reflux. He'd had coffee too quickly that morning. The Thursday arrived with the kind of grey London drizzle that made everyone miserable. Everyone except Grace, apparently, who greeted Thomas at her studio door with entirely too much energy for 9 a.m. So? She practically bounced on her heels. Tell me everything. I attempted 3 compliments. All failed. Thomas removed his coat. Martin took it with less flourish than usual, probably still processing his previous encounter. One woman threatened legal action. One man thought I was trying to recruit him for a cult. The third person simply walked away mid-sentence. Grace's eyes went wide, then wider. Then she pressed her lips together hard, clearly trying not to laugh. It's not funny, Thomas said. It's a little funny, Martin offered from behind the coat rack. It's very funny, Grace corrected, no longer even trying to hide her grin. What did you say to them? Thomas recounted each incident with clinical precision. By the end, Grace had tears in her eyes from suppressed laughter, and even he had to admit the situation sounded worse when said aloud. Okay, Grace managed, wiping her eyes. Okay, new plan. We're going to practice here, right now. I'll be the stranger, and you're going to compliment me. That defeats the purpose of the stranger element. Thomas. She said his name like it was both a warning and an invitation. He noticed she'd stopped calling him Mr. Ashford. Just try. He looked at her. Really looked. She wore yellow today, bright as sunshine against the grey day outside. Her hair was pulled back, but a few dark strands had escaped. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow. Her eyes were watching him with that particular mixture of patience and challenge that he was beginning to recognize as distinctly Grace. You have, he started, then stopped. This shouldn't be difficult. It was just words. Your approach to teaching is unconventional but surprisingly effective. Grace waited. And? What? Thomas, that's not a compliment. That's a performance review. She moved closer, and he caught the scent of something floral. Jasmine, maybe. Try again. But this time don't think, just say something true. Don't think. She might as well have asked him to stop breathing. But Grace was looking at him with those dark eyes, expectant and patient, and something else he couldn't quite name. So Thomas did something he never did. He spoke without calculating the outcome. You make chaos seem purposeful, he said quietly. Like maybe being out of control isn't as terrifying as I thought. The studio went very quiet. Martin had stopped breathing. Grace's expression shifted into something Thomas couldn't analyze or categorize. That, she said softly, was perfect. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Thomas Ashford had absolutely no idea what to do next. Grace had dealt with difficult clients before, but none of them had ever made her forget how to breathe with a single sentence. You make chaos seem purposeful. 3 days later, she was still thinking about it, which was ridiculous. She was a professional. She'd written a book about maintaining boundaries. She'd given lectures on the importance of separating personal feelings from professional relationships. And yet here she was, rereading her session notes for the 15th time, trying to decode whether Thomas Ashford had meant what she thought he'd meant. "You're spiraling," Martin announced, appearing with 2 cups of tea. "I can see it in your eyes. You have that look." "What look?" "The oh no, I might actually like the impossible client look." Martin settled into the chair across from her desk. "It's very distinct. Your left eyebrow does this tiny twitch." Grace's hand flew to her eyebrow. "It does not." "It absolutely does. You're doing it right now." Martin sipped his tea with infuriating smugness. "So, are we going to talk about the fact that Mr. Robot gave you the most romantic compliment I've heard in 5 years? Or are we going to pretend you're still just his communication coach?" "He's my client, Martin." "That's not an answer." "That's the only answer." Grace stood, pacing to the window. Rain streaked down the glass, turning London into a watercolor painting. "Besides, he's trying to win someone else. Rebecca. Remember? Please." He hasn't mentioned Rebecca once since that first session. Martin set down his teacup with a decisive clink. "What he has done is text you 4 times with clarification questions that had nothing to do with the assignment." Grace had noticed that too. Yesterday's text, "Is sincerity measured by word count or emotional impact?" This morning's, "If someone laughs at your attempt at humor, is that success or pity?" She'd answered both, probably too quickly. "He's just thorough," Grace said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Martin's response was cut off by the studio door flying open with theatrical force. A tiny elderly woman marched in, followed by a flustered-looking Thomas. "Gran, please." "Oh, hush." The woman, barely 5 feet tall, white hair perfectly coiffed, eyes sharp as broken glass, swept past Thomas and extended her hand to Grace. "You must be the miracle worker trying to make my grandson human. Eleanor Ashford. Call me Nana. Everyone does." Grace shook her hand, slightly dazed. "Grace Hartley. This is my assistant, Martin." "Charming space." Nana assessed the studio with the air of a general surveying a battlefield. "Bit too cheerful for my taste, but I suppose that's the point. Can't have depressed people teaching happiness, can we?" "I don't teach happiness, Mrs. Ashford. I teach communication." "Same thing, isn't it?" Nana settled into the consultation chair without waiting for an invitation. "Now, dear, I need you to explain something. My grandson, brilliant man, runs an empire, can calculate aircraft fuel efficiency in his head, cannot for the life of him understand why sending a woman a spreadsheet of compatibility metrics is not romantic." Thomas had gone very still in the doorway. Grace could see the exact moment he realized he'd been betrayed. "You told her." His voice was dangerously quiet. "She interrogated me," Nana shot back. "She has methods, this one." Martin was practically vibrating with glee. "Mrs. Ashford," Grace began diplomatically, "I appreciate your concern, but Thomas's sessions are confidential." "Nonsense. I'm 82 years old. I've earned the right to meddle." Nana fixed Grace with a look that could cut diamond. "Besides, I have information you need. This Rebecca person he's supposedly chasing. Complete fabrication." The room went silent. "Excuse me." Grace's voice came out strangled. Thomas looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Gran—" "Oh, don't gran me." Nana waved him off. "Rebecca Ashford is lovely, yes, but she's been dating a sculptor for 6 months. They're practically engaged. Thomas knows this. He's known this the entire time." Grace turned to Thomas slowly, very slowly. "Is this true?" He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him, Thomas Ashford looked completely, utterly human, embarrassed, vulnerable, caught. "Yes," he said quietly. "So you—" Grace's brain was trying to process this. "You hired me under false pretenses." "Technically, no. I hired you to teach me about emotional communication. The Rebecca objective was auxiliary." "Auxiliary?" Grace's voice rose. Martin grabbed the teacups, clearly preparing for explosion. "You wasted my time with a fake goal?" "It wasn't a waste." Thomas stepped into the room, and Grace noticed he looked different somehow. Less controlled, more real. "I needed an excuse to learn, to understand. And I couldn't just say I wanted to understand how people like you manage to make connection look easy." People like me. People who feel things without fear, who can walk into a room and make strangers feel seen, who... He stopped, seeming to realize he was saying too much. People who aren't broken. The word hung in the air between them. Grace's anger deflated like a punctured balloon. Behind Thomas, Nana watched with satisfaction. Martin had his hand pressed to his mouth. "You're not broken," Grace said softly. "You're just... You speak a different language than most people. That doesn't make you broken, doesn't it?" Thomas's smile was bitter. "I'm 36 years old. I've built a company that operates on 4 continents. I employ 3,000 people. And I couldn't tell a woman she had nice hair without making her think I was conducting a performance review." Despite herself, Grace laughed. A small sound barely there, but Thomas's expression shifted when he heard it. "You really are terrible at this," she admitted. "I know. And you lied to me. Technically, I omitted information." "That's the same thing, Thomas." "Is it?" They stared at each other. Grace could feel Martin and Nana watching them like spectators at a tennis match. "One chance," Grace said finally. "You get one chance to be completely honest with me. Why did you really hire me?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because 3 months ago, I attended a lecture on emotional intelligence in business. You were the speaker, and for 90 minutes, I watched you talk about vulnerability and connection and authenticity, and I realized I didn't understand a single thing you were describing. Not really. And I thought..." He paused. "I thought if I could learn from you, maybe I could understand what I've been missing my entire life." "Oh," Grace breathed. "Oh, indeed," Nana said with satisfaction. "Now shall we discuss lunch plans? I'm thinking that Thai place on Wardour Street. My treat." Martin applauded. Actually applauded. And Grace, professional communication expert and author of a best-selling book on boundaries, realized she was in serious trouble. Because Thomas Ashford wasn't just a client anymore. He was a man who'd just admitted he'd orchestrated an elaborate ruse just to spend time in her presence. And God help her, she found that absolutely ridiculously endearing. Thomas had survived hostile takeovers, emergency landings, and a particularly brutal interview with a Financial Times journalist who'd compared his management style to benevolent dictatorship with emphasis on the dictatorship. None of that prepared him for Grace Hartley's empathy exercise. "Absolutely not," he said, staring at the blindfold she'd just produced from her desk drawer. "Absolutely yes." Grace dangled it in front of him like bait. "You said you'd trust the process." "I said I'd try to trust the process. This is not trying, this is torture. It's empathy training." She moved closer, and Thomas caught that jasmine scent again. He'd looked it up. Jasmine essential oil, known for its calming properties. Not that it was calming him, quite the opposite. "You're going to experience 3 minutes of not being able to see, and I'm going to guide you through this space. It'll teach you about vulnerability and trust. It'll teach me about workers' compensation claims when I trip over Martin's dramatic scarves." "I heard that," Martin called from somewhere behind the filing cabinets. Grace's lips twitched. Thomas was learning to recognize that expression. It meant she was trying not to laugh at him. He was also learning that he didn't entirely mind being the source of her amusement, which was concerning. 3 minutes, Grace promised. "Then you can go back to your regularly scheduled emotional unavailability." "I'm not emotionally unavailable. I'm selectively engaged. That's literally the same thing." She stepped even closer, close enough that he could see the small flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Come on, Thomas, be brave." Something about the way she said his name, soft, teasing, like she was coaxing a child to try something new, made him take the blindfold. "If I break an ankle, I'm billing you for the medical expenses." "Noted." Her fingers brushed his as she helped adjust the blindfold, and Thomas's entire nervous system seemed to short-circuit. "Can you see anything?" "No." "Good. Now take my hand." He did. Her hand was smaller than his, warm and calloused in a way that surprised him. He'd expected soft. Everything about Grace seemed soft. Her curls, her clothes, her voice. But her hand felt like it belonged to someone who worked, who created, who built things. "Okay," Grace said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. 3 steps forward. "Trust me." Thomas took 3 steps. He didn't trip, didn't collide with anything. Grace's hand anchored him, guided him, made the darkness less terrifying. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Statistically inconvenient." She laughed. Actually laughed. Thomas, honest answer. No data, no deflection. "How does it feel?" He was quiet, focusing on the sensation, the disorientation, the way his other senses heightened, the sound of rain against windows, the faint classical music Martin had playing, the warmth of Grace's hand in his. "Uncomfortable," he admitted, "but not as terrible as I expected. See, that's growth." She tugged him gently to the left. "2 more steps. Tell me about something you felt this week." Not thought. Felt. Aren't feelings just thoughts with chemical reactions? Thomas. Right. Honest answer. He considered this. What had he felt? Frustrated when my director of operations presented a proposal using last quarter's outdated metrics. Satisfied when I corrected him. Annoyed when he looked relieved rather than embarrassed. Okay, those are all variations of anger. What else? Isn't anger sufficient? Do you really only feel anger? Thomas opened his mouth to say yes, then stopped. Because that wasn't entirely true. Standing here blindfolded, holding Grace's hand while she led him through her studio, he felt something else entirely. Something that had no metric, no data point, no logical explanation. I feel... He paused. Curious. Often. About things that don't matter to business. Like why Martin insists on wearing purple every Thursday, or why your studio has exactly 17 motivational posters, but none of them match your actual aesthetic, or why you smell like jasmine when jasmine season ended months ago. Silence. Then very quietly, "You noticed all that?" "I notice everything. It's compulsive." The words came easier in darkness. "Last week, when I complimented you, when I said you make chaos seem purposeful, I meant it. You do. You take all these scattered, irrational human emotions and somehow make them make sense. And I don't understand how. I've been trying to reverse engineer it, but I can't." More silence. Grace's hand had gone very still in his. "You can't reverse engineer people, Thomas," she said finally, and her voice sounded strange, softer. "We're not machines. I'm beginning to realize that. Is that why you really hired me? To reverse engineer connection?" Thomas considered lying, considered deflecting, considered all the safe, logical responses. Instead, he said, "I hired you because when you spoke at that lecture, you smiled at someone in the 3rd row who looked terrified, and your entire face changed, like you could see exactly what they needed and wanted to give it to them. And I thought..." He stopped. "You thought what?" "I thought if someone ever looked at me like that, I might understand what poets write about, what my grandmother watches in her terrible soap operas. What makes people do irrational, inefficient things like send flowers or write songs or stay up all night talking about nothing." He heard Grace's breath catch. "You can remove the blindfold now," she whispered. Thomas pulled it off, blinked against the sudden light. Grace was standing very close, her eyes wide and dark and fixed on his face, with an expression he couldn't categorize. Behind her, Martin had frozen mid-movement, holding a teacup like a statue. "That," Grace said, her voice unsteady, "was the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." "Was it correct?" Thomas asked, because he genuinely didn't know. "Did I do the exercise properly?" A laugh bubbled out of her, somewhere between delight and despair. "Yes, Thomas, you did it perfectly." She stepped back and he immediately missed her proximity. "But you're also a complete disaster who's absolutely ruining my professional boundaries." "Is that bad?" "Terrible," she agreed. "Should I find a different coach?" "Don't you dare." They stared at each other. The studio suddenly felt very warm. "Well," Martin announced loudly, breaking the moment, "I'll just be in the other room, filing things, alphabetically, while singing loudly so I can't hear anything happening here." "Martin," Grace warned. But Martin was already gone, and the door was closing, and Thomas was alone with Grace and the dawning realization that he'd just told her things he'd never told anyone. And she hadn't run. She hadn't laughed, well, not cruelly. She'd just looked at him like maybe, possibly, he wasn't as hopeless as he feared. "Next session," Grace said, her professional voice slightly unsteady. "We're working on maintaining appropriate emotional distance." "For whose benefit?" Thomas asked. "Mine or yours?" Grace's cheeks flushed pink. "That's none of your business." "I think," Thomas said, surprising himself with his own boldness. "It might be both of our business." He left before she could respond, but he heard her laugh as the door closed behind him. Small, breathless, and absolutely wonderful. Outside, London rain poured down, and Thomas Ashford, who had never understood poetry, suddenly wanted to write volumes about the way Grace Hartley said his name. Grace had made a terrible mistake. Not just accepting Thomas Ashford as a client, that was debatable. Not letting him get under her skin. That ship had sailed. No, the real mistake was agreeing to accompany him on a field exercise to practice his newfound communication skills. In public, at a networking event, where actual humans would be subjected to Thomas's attempts at casual conversation. "Remind me why I thought this was a good idea," she muttered to Martin, who'd insisted on coming along as moral support and potential damage control. "Because you're attracted to him and your judgment is impaired," Martin whispered back, adjusting his bow tie. He'd dressed for the occasion like he was attending the Oscars. "Also, this is going to be phenomenal entertainment." They stood in the lobby of a posh hotel in Mayfair, watching Thomas work the room. Or rather, watching Thomas stand rigidly beside a potted fern, observing the networking event like an anthropologist studying an alien species. "He's been standing there for 12 minutes, Martin noted. "Not moving, just analyzing." "He's processing," Grace defended, though she wasn't sure why she was defending him. "Building a strategy. He looks like he's planning a military invasion." Grace couldn't argue with that. Thomas had that intense expression he got when calculating something, eyebrows drawn together, jaw tight, eyes tracking every movement in the room with laser precision. She should intervene. That's what a good coach would do. Instead, she found herself appreciating how well he wore that charcoal suit, which was completely inappropriate and entirely unhelpful. "I'm going in," she announced. "May God have mercy on us all," Martin intoned. Grace crossed the room, weaving through clusters of chatting professionals. Thomas spotted her immediately, and something in his expression shifted, relaxed almost. "You look terrified," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I'm not terrified. I'm strategically cautious." He glanced at her, then did a double take. "That's a new dress." Grace looked down at her navy cocktail dress, surprised he'd noticed. "It is. Good observation." "It's—" Thomas paused, clearly trying to formulate a proper compliment. "The color contrasts effectively with your skin tone, and the structural design suggests quality craftsmanship while maintaining professional appropriateness for the venue." Grace stared at him. "Did you just compliment my dress like it was a corporate merger? Was it incorrect?" "Thomas," she couldn't help but laugh. "You're supposed to say something like, 'You look beautiful,' or 'That dress is stunning on you,' not analyze its structural integrity." He frowned. "But those statements are subjective and potentially make assumptions about my appreciation of your aesthetic that could be—" He stopped, seeing her expression. "I'm doing it again. You're doing it again. In my defense, you do look beautiful, but saying that without qualifying data felt insufficient." Grace's heart did something complicated in her chest. "The unqualified version is actually better." Noted. Thomas pulled out his phone and actually typed something. "Compliments should be simple and direct, no supporting documentation required." "Are you taking notes on our conversation? How else will I remember the correct protocol?" "Thomas, relationships aren't protocols. Why does everyone keep saying that?" He looked genuinely confused, and Grace had to resist the urge to either kiss him or shake him. Possibly both. "Okay." She took a deep breath. "New assignment. See that woman over there, by the wine table? Go introduce yourself and have a normal conversation. No data, no analysis, just be human." Thomas followed her gaze to a woman in her 40s chatting with a colleague. "What should I discuss?" "Anything, the weather, the venue, just casual small talk." "I don't do casual. I've noticed." Grace gave him a gentle push. "Go. I believe in you." "That's statistically unlikely given my track record." "Thomas." Going. He straightened his tie, took what appeared to be a fortifying breath, and marched toward the wine table like he was heading into battle. Grace watched, holding her breath. Martin appeared beside her, holding 2 champagne flutes. "This is either going to be adorable or catastrophic," he whispered. "Or both," Grace murmured. They watched Thomas approach the woman, saw him smile. Well, attempt to smile. It looked more like he was having a mild seizure. The woman turned, looking surprised, but not unfriendly. Thomas said something. The woman's eyebrows rose. He said something else. The woman laughed. Not a polite laugh, but a genuine one. "Oh my God," Martin breathed. "He's doing it. He's actually doing it." Grace felt an absurd swell of pride. Look at him, being social, being human, being... Thomas gestured enthusiastically while making some point, and his hand knocked directly into a passing waiter's tray. Time seemed to slow. The tray tilted. 6 glasses of red wine arced through the air in perfect synchronization. They landed, with impeccable aim, directly onto a tall man in an expensive white suit. The room went silent. The man in the white suit, now red suit, turned slowly. His face was the color of a tomato, or possibly a blood clot. "You absolute moron!" he roared. Thomas stared at the carnage, his expression cycling through shock, horror, and what might have been the beginning of a panic attack. His eyes found Grace's across the room. "Help," they said. Grace was already moving. "I'm so sorry," Thomas was saying as she arrived. "That was entirely my fault. I'll pay for the cleaning, the replacement, any—" "You'll pay for more than that." The man was practically vibrating with rage. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Gerald Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Financial, and you just destroyed a custom Italian suit at a major industry event. I understand your frustration. You understand nothing. Actually," Grace interjected smoothly, stepping between them, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Gerald turned his fury on her. "And who are you?" "Grace Hartley, communications specialist." She smiled her most professional smile. "And I believe what my associate was trying to express is that this was an unfortunate accident, and he's willing to make appropriate restitution. However, perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private. I notice several people recording on their phones, and I'm sure neither of you wants this becoming tomorrow's viral video." Gerald's eyes widened. He glanced around, saw the phones, and his face shifted from rage to calculation. "Fine," he bit out, "but I want his information. All of it." Thomas handed over a business card with shaking hands. Gerald snatched it, read it, and his expression changed entirely. "Thomas Ashford, of Ashford Aviation?" "Yes. The Thomas Ashford who just acquired Northern Sky Airlines." "That would be me." Gerald's entire demeanor shifted. "Well, that changes things." He laughed awkwardly. "No hard feelings, then. These things happen. I'll send you the cleaning bill." He practically scurried away. Thomas stood frozen, wine-stained guilt written all over his face. Grace touched his arm gently. "Come on," she said. "Let's get some air." Outside, the night was cool and damp. Thomas leaned against the building, looking more undone than she'd ever seen him. "I destroyed a man's suit," he said hollowly. "Caused a scene. Confirmed every suspicion that I don't belong in social situations." "You also had an actual conversation with someone before the wine incident," Grace pointed out. She was laughing, real laughing. "Before I assaulted someone with alcohol. It was an accident, Thomas." He looked at her, and Grace saw something raw in his expression. Vulnerability, fear. The man behind the billionaire mask. "What if I can't do this?" he asked quietly. "What if I'm just fundamentally wrong for a world that runs on emotion and connection?" Grace stepped closer, close enough to see the wine splash on his collar, close enough to catch his scent, something expensive and cedar-like. "You're not wrong," she said firmly. "You're just learning a new language, and yes, you're going to make mistakes, spectacular, wine-soaked mistakes. But Thomas..." She waited until he met her eyes. "That woman laughed because you made a joke, a real joke. Do you know how far you've come?" "Not far enough to avoid public humiliation." "Welcome to being human," she smiled. "We're all just one wine tray away from disaster." He laughed, a real laugh, startled and genuine, and Grace realized she was in much deeper trouble than she'd thought. Because she didn't just want to teach Thomas Ashford how to connect with people anymore. She wanted him to connect with her. Grace should have known something was wrong when Nana Ashford called her directly. "Grace, darling," the elderly woman's voice crackled through the phone. "I need you to come to my house immediately. It's an emergency." "What kind of emergency? Is Thomas all right?" "Thomas is fine, emotionally constipated as always, but physically fine." This is a different kind of emergency. Can you be here in an hour? Grace glanced at Martin, who was reorganizing their filing system in what he called chromatic emotional order, which meant absolutely nothing but gave him something to do. I suppose so. Excellent. I'll text you the address. Bring wine. The good kind. The line went dead. That sounded ominous, Martin observed, holding up a pink folder labeled Heartbreak Mild. That sounded like trouble, Grace corrected, but she was already grabbing her coat. Nana Ashford's house was not what Grace expected. Instead of some sterile mansion, it was a cozy Georgian townhouse in Notting Hill, with window boxes overflowing with flowers and a bright red door that screamed personality. Nana answered on the first knock, wearing a velvet tracksuit and holding a glass of what appeared to be straight whiskey. Right on time. I like that. She ushered Grace inside. Thomas is pathologically punctual too, but at least you make it look effortless. The interior was wonderfully chaotic. Overstuffed furniture, walls covered in family photos, a television playing what looked like a Brazilian telenovela with subtitles. Grace felt immediately at home. So, Nana said, settling into an armchair and gesturing for Grace to sit, let's discuss my grandson. Mrs. Ashford, Nana, we're past formalities. She took a sip of whiskey. Thomas is in love with you. Grace choked on air. I'm sorry, what? In love, smitten, completely besotted. It's adorable and also mildly concerning because the boy has the emotional intelligence of a particularly dense rock. Nana leaned forward. But here's the problem. He doesn't realize it yet. And even when he does, he'll probably try to analyze it to death instead of just accepting it. Mrs. Nana, I think you're mistaken. Thomas is my client. We have a professional relationship. Darling, I've been married 3 times. I know chemistry when I see it. Nana's eyes twinkled. The way he talks about you when he thinks I'm not listening? The way he checks his phone every 5 minutes hoping you've texted? The way he spent 45 minutes last week debating which tie would project appropriate confidence for your session? Grace's heart was doing gymnastics. He did. Navy blue with subtle silver stripes. I told him you wouldn't care, but he insisted presentation matters. Nana smiled. He's trying so hard, Grace. And I haven't seen him try at anything personal since, well, ever. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. Nana's voice went soft. Do you have feelings for him? Grace opened her mouth to deny it. Should deny it. That's what a professional would do. Instead, she said, I don't know. That's a lie, but I'll accept it for now. Nana stood, surprisingly spry for her age. Come, I want to show you something. She led Grace down a hallway lined with photos. Grace recognized a younger Thomas in several. School pictures, university graduation, corporate events. But one photo made her stop. Thomas, maybe 10 years old, sitting alone at what appeared to be a birthday party. Other children were playing in the background. He was reading a book. His parents were brilliant, Nana said quietly. Both engineers, logical, practical, successful. They loved Thomas, but they didn't understand him when he started showing interest in patterns instead of people. So they encouraged what he was good at, math, analysis, efficiency, and ignored what he struggled with. Connection, Grace whispered. He spent his entire childhood being told his way of thinking was right, and everyone else's was wrong. Is it any wonder he grew up believing emotions were problems to solve rather than experiences to have? Grace studied the photo. Young Thomas looked so isolated, so alone. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the first person who's made him want to change. Not for a business deal or a strategic advantage, for himself. Nana turned to face her. And because I'm a meddling old woman who wants to see her grandson happy before I die. You're not dying. Not immediately, no, but I'm 82, the clock's ticking. She squeezed Grace's hand. I'm not asking you to fall in love with him. I'm just asking you to give him a chance. A real chance. Not as a client, as a man. Before Grace could respond, the front door opened. Gran, I got your message about the emergency. Thomas stopped dead when he saw Grace. Oh, indeed, Nana said cheerfully. Look who's here. What a coincidence. This was a setup, Thomas said flatly. Obviously. Nana was completely unrepentant. You two need to stop dancing around each other. It's exhausting to watch. Gran, don't gran me. I'm old. I'm allowed to meddle. She grabbed her purse. I'm going to my yoga class. You two talk or don't talk, or whatever it is young people do these days. Just don't waste time being stupid about your feelings. She swept out, leaving Grace and Thomas standing in the hallway, surrounded by family photos and awkward silence. I'm sorry, Thomas said finally. She ambushed you. She ambushed both of us. Grace managed a laugh. Your grandmother is terrifying. She's been told. Thomas moved closer, hands in his pockets. What did she say to you? Grace considered lying, considered deflecting. Instead, she said, she told me you spent 45 minutes choosing a tie for our last session. Thomas went very still. She told you that? She did. In my defense, navy blue with silver stripes projects confidence without aggression. It's been proven in multiple studies. Thomas, Grace stepped toward him. Why do you care what I think about your ties? He met her eyes and Grace saw the moment he decided to be honest. Because, he said quietly, everything's different when you're in the room. Colors are brighter. Conversations matter more. And I find myself wanting to be the version of myself that you seem to believe exists, the one who isn't broken or wrong or fundamentally incompatible with normal human interaction. Grace's breath caught. I don't think you're broken. You said that before. So I'm starting to believe you might mean it. They stood there, inches apart, in Nana Ashford's hallway. Grace could hear the telenovela still playing in the living room, could smell Thomas's cedar cologne, could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. This is complicated, she whispered. I'm aware. You're my client. Technically, I've already learned what I came to learn. Have you? Thomas smiled. A real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. I've learned that connection isn't something you analyze, it's something you feel. And Grace, he paused, I feel everything when I'm with you. Grace had no response to that. No professional boundary, no clever deflection. Just the overwhelming urge to close the distance between them, and damn the consequences. But before she could, Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. I have to go. Board meeting I forgot about. Of course. Grace stepped back, trying to ignore the disappointment flooding through her. But Grace? He turned at the door. Thank you for seeing past the disaster. He left, and Grace stood alone in Nana Ashford's hallway, surrounded by photos of a lonely boy who'd grown into a complicated man. A man who was becoming far too important to her professional sanity. A man who, despite all his awkwardness and analysis, had just said the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. She pulled out her phone and texted Martin, I'm in trouble. His response was immediate. I knew it. Tell me everything. But Grace didn't know how to explain that she was falling for her most impossible client. So she just wrote, later, and hoped she'd figure out what to do before later arrived. Absolutely not. Come on, Thomas. It's just a practice date. With you. Technically, with Martin pretending to be me, while I observe and take notes. Thomas looked at Martin, who had somehow procured a wig and was applying lipstick with disturbing enthusiasm. This is psychological torture, Thomas said flatly. This is education, Grace corrected, clipboard in hand. She'd been avoiding him for 3 days since the incident at Nana's house. 3 days of unanswered texts and rescheduled sessions. Now she was back to full professional mode, which Thomas was learning to recognize as her defense mechanism. You need to practice romantic conversation in a safe environment. There is nothing safe about Martin in a wig. I heard that, Martin called, adjusting his fake curls. And for your information, I'm channeling Grace's essence, her wit, her charm, her devastating ability to make men question their entire existence. That's oddly specific, Thomas muttered. Grace's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look up from her clipboard. The scenario is simple. You're on a first date at a nice restaurant. Your goal is to show genuine interest, ask meaningful questions, and create emotional connection. Martin will respond as I would, and I'll grade your performance. You're grading me on hypothetical romance. Welcome to my world. She finally met his eyes, and Thomas saw something flicker there. Uncertainty, maybe, or nervousness. Unless you'd prefer I play myself. The air between them went electric. Thomas could practically hear Martin holding his breath. No, Thomas said more sharply than intended. That would be complicated. Complicated, Grace repeated, and her expression shuttered. Right, of course. Professional boundaries. She turned away before he could explain that complicated meant, I don't trust myself to pretend with you when all I want is the real thing. Martin clapped his hands. Places, everyone. Thomas, sit there. Grace, observation corner. I'll be behind this screen for my dramatic entrance. He disappeared behind a decorative partition. Thomas sat at the small table Grace had set up, complete with a candle and fake wine glasses. This was absurd. He'd negotiated billion-pound deals. He'd presented to shareholders. He'd given keynote speeches to thousands. But sitting here waiting for Martin in a wig to pretend to be Grace made his palms sweat. Begin, Grace called. Martin emerged from behind the screen with a flourish, somehow managing to walk in heels Thomas hadn't noticed him putting on. He sat across from Thomas, batting his eyelashes. So, Martin said in a falsetto that sounded nothing like Grace, tell me about yourself. Thomas stared. This is ridiculous. Stay in character, Grace commanded from her corner. Thomas took a breath. Fine. If they wanted him to do this, he'd do it properly. I run an aviation company. We operate across 4 continents with a primary focus on efficiency optimization and sustainable fuel alternatives. That's your opening. Grace's voice was pained. Thomas, no one wants to hear about fuel alternatives on a first date. Why not? It's interesting. It's a lecture. She stood, moving closer. Try again. Tell me something personal, something that matters to you beyond work. Thomas looked at Martin's expectant face, then at Grace's challenging expression. Something personal. Something that mattered. I have a grandmother who thinks I'm emotionally incompetent, he said slowly, and she's probably right. I've spent most of my life believing that feelings were distractions, that caring about things beyond metrics and results made you weak. Martin's theatrical expression softened into something more genuine. But recently, Thomas continued, his eyes moving to Grace without permission, someone made me realize that maybe weakness and strength aren't as separate as I thought, that maybe being vulnerable enough to admit you don't understand something is braver than pretending you have all the answers. Grace had gone very still. That's beautiful, Martin whispered, completely out of character. Grace, that was... Stay in character, Martin. Grace's voice was rough. Right. Yes. Martin cleared his throat, back to falsetto. And what do you do for fun? Fun. Thomas considered this. I read. Mostly technical manuals and financial reports. Dear God, Grace muttered. But, Thomas added, I've recently started reading poetry, because someone once mentioned they liked Wordsworth and I wanted to understand why. Martin's eyes widened. He glanced at Grace, who was staring at Thomas like he'd just spoken Mandarin. You're reading poetry? Grace asked, forgetting her observer role entirely. I'm attempting to read poetry, Thomas corrected. Most of it makes no sense, but there was one line, something about feeling with the heart as well as thinking with the mind. That resonated. The room had gone quiet except for the soft jazz music Martin had put on for ambiance. Ask me a question, Martin prompted gently. Thomas nodded. This part he'd actually researched. What's something you're passionate about? Not what you do for work, but something that makes you forget time exists when you're doing it. Martin blinked, looked at Grace for guidance. Answer him, Grace said softly. As yourself, not me. Theatre, Martin admitted, dropping the falsetto entirely. When I'm on stage, even in the tiny productions no one sees, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Like all my dramatic tendencies suddenly have purpose. That's good, Thomas said. Having something that makes you feel purposeful. I've never had that outside of work. Never? Martin asked. Thomas's eyes found Grace again. Not until recently. The silence stretched. Martin was openly staring between them now, wig slightly askew. Okay, Grace said abruptly. New scenario. The date is going well. You want to show physical interest. What do you do? Define physical interest. Thomas. Grace sounded exasperated and amused simultaneously. You want to touch her hand, or brush her hair back. Something that signals romantic intent without being predatory, Thomas finished. I understand, but doesn't that require consent? Shouldn't I ask first? Oh my God, you're actually a good person under all that emotional constipation, Martin breathed. Grace, I know, Grace said quietly. Thomas stood. walked over to where she stood with her clipboard. "If this were real," he said, looking directly at her, "I'd ask. I'd say, 'May I hold your hand?' Because I'm not good at reading signals and I don't want to make assumptions." Grace's clipboard clattered to the floor. Neither of them moved to pick it up. "And if she said yes," she whispered, "then I'd take her hand like this." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back. When she didn't, he gently took her hand in his. "And I'd tell her that touching her is the first thing that's felt natural to me in weeks of trying to be natural." Martin made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "Thomas," Grace said, and her voice shook slightly, "this is still just practice." "Is it?" He ran his thumb across her knuckles, watching her eyes darken. "Because this doesn't feel like practice." The studio door burst open. Nana Ashford stood in the doorway, holding grocery bags and wearing a lime green tracksuit that hurt to look at. "I brought snacks," she announced cheerfully, "and wine." "Oh." She took in the scene. Thomas holding Grace's hand, Martin in a wig, the romantic setup. "Am I interrupting?" "Yes," Martin and Grace said in unison. "No," Thomas said, not letting go of Grace's hand. "You have perfect timing, actually. I need to ask you something." "Thomas," Grace warned. But he was already turning to his grandmother. "How do you know when something stops being practice and starts being real?" Nana's face split into a delighted grin. "Oh, darling boy, it stops being practice the moment you stop pretending you don't care about the outcome." She set down her bags and pulled out her phone. "Now everyone say intervention." "Gran, what are you—" The flash went off, capturing Thomas still holding Grace's hand, both of them looking startled and vulnerable and entirely too close. "Perfect," Nana declared. "This is going in the family album, right next to your baby pictures." "I hate you sometimes," Thomas said. "No, you don't." Nana kissed his cheek. "Now, who wants wine? We have so much to discuss." Martin raised his hand, wig slipping further down his forehead. And Grace, still standing there with her hand in Thomas's, started laughing. Actually laughing until tears rolled down her face. "This is insane," she managed between giggles. "This whole situation is absolutely insane." "Insane," Thomas agreed, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. And he still hadn't let go of her hand. Grace was attempting to maintain professional boundaries. Keyword, attempting. It had been a week since the practice date. A week since Thomas had held her hand and said things that made her forget why boundaries existed in the first place. A week of him texting her questions that had nothing to do with communication coaching and everything to do with getting to know her. "Do you prefer tea or coffee?" "Ta, what's your favorite time of day, TA? If you could live in any era, which would you choose and why?" "TA." She'd answered all of them, like a fool. Now she sat in her studio, staring at her calendar and trying to figure out how to maintain any semblance of professional distance when all she wanted was to— "You're spiraling again," Martin announced, appearing with coffee. "Your eyebrow is twitching." "It is not." "It absolutely is. You're thinking about him." Grace opened her mouth to deny it, but her phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. Martin squealed. "Shut up," Grace hissed, answering. "Hello? Grace?" Thomas's voice sounded strange, stressed. "I need your help." "What's wrong?" "I have a conference call in 10 minutes with investors in Tokyo. They're traditional, formal, and I've just been informed they find my communication style cold and impersonal. My director of operations suggested I show more warmth." He paused. "I don't know how to do that over video." Grace checked her watch. "Can you delay the call?" "No. It took 3 months to schedule." She made a decision she'd probably regret. "Send me the meeting link." "What?" "Send me the link. I'll join muted and with video off. I'll text you guidance in real time." Silence. Then, "You do that?" "Thomas, if you lose this deal because you accidentally insulted someone's grandfather again, that was one time and it was a cultural misunderstanding. Then yes, I'll help. Send the link." He did. 2 minutes later, Grace was logged into the conference call, watching Thomas sit at his immaculate home office desk, looking like he was preparing for war rather than a business discussion. She texted, "Breathe. Smile when you greet them. Use their names." The investors appeared on screen. 3 older Japanese men in formal business attire. Thomas bowed slightly. "Tanaka-san, Yamamoto-san, Sato-san, thank you for making time for this discussion." Grace texted, Good. Now ask about their day before jumping into business. Thomas's eye twitched. He'd clearly seen the text, but he nodded. I hope your morning has been pleasant. One of the men, Tanaka-san, looked surprised. Yes, thank you. Your consideration is appreciated. The meeting progressed. Grace watched Thomas navigate technical specifications and financial projections with his usual precision, but every few minutes she'd send a text. You're lecturing. Ask their opinion. That transition was too abrupt. Acknowledge his concern first. Smile, Thomas. You look like you're announcing a funeral. She watched him adjust in real time, saw the moment the investors began to relax. Tanaka-san even laughed at something Thomas said, a genuine laugh that made Thomas's surprised expression almost comical. Then disaster struck. Yamamoto-san said something in Japanese. Thomas clearly understood it. His expression shifted, but he didn't respond immediately. Grace texted, What did he say? Thomas typed back, He asked if I have family. They believe family commitment indicates business commitment. Tell them about Nana. That seems unprofessional. It's humanizing. Trust me. Grace watched Thomas take a breath. I do have family, yes. My grandmother, who is 82 and has the strongest opinions of anyone I've ever met. She recently told me that I work too much and need to find balance. She's probably right. All three investors smiled. Sato-san spoke. Wise grandmother. Family wisdom is valuable. Extremely valuable, Thomas agreed. She's currently trying to convince me to learn salsa dancing. I'm resisting, but her persistence is formidable. They laughed. Actually laughed. Grace felt her heart do something complicated. The meeting wrapped successfully. Thomas secured the deal with terms that satisfied everyone. As the investors logged off, he sat back in his chair, looking stunned. Grace called him instead of texting. You did it, she said when he answered. We did it. His voice was warm. Grace, I couldn't have thanked you seriously. You're welcome, though you'll probably get an invoice for emergency coaching. I'll pay double. A pause. Can I see you? I'm at home. You could come here and I'll make dinner, to thank you properly. Every professional alarm in Grace's head started screaming. Thomas, I don't think... Please. He said it simply. I want to see you, not as a coach, as... Grace. She should say no, should maintain boundaries, should remember all the reasons why getting involved with a client was a terrible idea. Text me your address, she heard herself say. And Thomas's home was not what she expected. Instead of a sterile penthouse, it was a converted warehouse in Shoreditch, all exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and surprisingly comfortable furniture. Books everywhere, plants that somehow hadn't died, art that suggested actual human taste. This is... Grace looked around amazed. This is wonderful. You were expecting corporate minimalism, Thomas guessed, taking her coat. Maybe a little. I spend enough time in offices. He led her to the kitchen, which was open and modern without being cold. I wanted home to be different. Tea, coffee, wine. Wine, definitely. He poured 2 glasses with careful precision, then completely ruined it by almost dropping hers while handing it over. Smooth, Grace teased. I'm better with aircraft than wine glasses. He recovered, managed to successfully deliver the wine, then just stood there looking at her like he wasn't sure what to do next. You said dinner, Grace prompted. Right, yes, dinner. Thomas moved to the refrigerator. I should warn you, my cooking skills are limited. I can make pasta, just pasta, very competent pasta. Pasta sounds perfect. She watched him cook, which was unexpectedly endearing. He measured everything precisely, checked timings on his phone, muttered to himself about olive oil ratios. It was possibly the most Thomas thing she'd ever witnessed. So, he said while stirring sauce, Nana called me this morning. Oh no. She wanted to know if I'd asked you out properly yet. He glanced at her. I told her this wasn't a date. It's not, Grace agreed quickly. Too quickly. She laughed at me. Thomas added herbs with the concentration of a surgeon. Then she said, Thomas dear, if you invite a woman you're clearly in love with to your home for a private dinner, that's a date. Stop being thick. Grace's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. She said you were... What? Thomas set down his spoon, turned to face her fully. In love with you, he repeated calmly. I told her she was being dramatic, that I barely understand basic friendship, let alone love. that it was impossible to feel something that significant after only a few weeks. Grace's heart was hammering. What did she say to that? She said love doesn't operate on timelines or logic. He moved closer. She said sometimes you just know. And then she asked me if I thought about you constantly, if your opinions mattered more than anyone else's, if I found myself wanting to be better just because you believed I could be. And, Grace whispered, and I couldn't argue with any of that. Thomas stopped a foot away from her, close enough that she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I'm not good at this, at feelings, at knowing what's appropriate to say. But Grace, I think my grandmother might be right. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. Thomas. Grace set down her wineglass before she dropped it. This is complicated. The ethics. You're not my coach anymore. I'm still... You're Grace. He said her name like it meant something. And I'm Thomas. And we're two people who are apparently very bad at maintaining professional boundaries. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she admitted. Neither do I. He smiled slightly. But I've spent my entire life only doing things I knew I was ready for. And I think that's made me miss everything that actually matters. Grace stared at him, this impossible, awkward, brilliant man who'd somehow learned to speak her language. The pasta's going to burn, she said. I don't care. You should care. You were very specific about timing. Grace, he laughed, I'm trying to tell you something important, and you're worried about pasta. I'm worried about everything. She threw her hands up. I'm worried about ethics and boundaries, and the fact that I wrote a whole book about professional standards that I'm apparently completely ignoring. I'm worried that you're going to realize I'm not actually special, just someone who gave you permission to be yourself. So I'm worried, he kissed her forehead, just pressed his lips there, gentle and brief and completely unexpected. Grace froze. Sorry, Thomas said immediately, stepping back. Was that... should I have asked first? You just kissed my forehead. Technically, that's not a real kiss. It's more of a gesture of comfort and... Thomas. Grace looked up at him. Stop analyzing. I don't know how. Try. He took a breath, let it out. Okay. No analysis, just truth. I want to kiss you properly. Have wanted to since you first challenged me in your studio, but I don't want to mess this up, and I'm terrified I'm going to say something wrong or move too fast or... Grace reached up and put her hand on his cheek. They stood there, frozen, while something shifted between them. The pasta's definitely burning, she whispered. I really don't care, he whispered back. But the smoke alarm had other ideas. It shrieked to life, and they jumped apart. Thomas swore, actually swore, and grabbed the pan off the heat. Grace opened windows. The alarm kept screaming. I'm turning it off, Thomas shouted, dragging a chair over to reach it. Just press the button. I'm trying. Grace started laughing, couldn't help it. Here they were having this huge moment, and the universe decided to intervene with burnt pasta and a smoke alarm that wouldn't quit. Thomas finally killed the alarm, climbed down from the chair, looked at the destroyed pasta, then at Grace's laughing face, and started laughing too. This is a disaster, he said. Complete disaster, she agreed. They stood there, surrounded by smoke and ruined dinner and possibility. I should probably order pizza, Thomas said. That would be smart. But first, he moved toward her again. Can we... Grace's phone rang. She glanced at it. Martin's name flashed on the screen. I have to take this. He only calls if it's an emergency. Thomas nodded, looking disappointed. Grace answered. Martin, what? Grace! Martin's voice was panicked. The studio! There's water everywhere! A pipe burst! Everything's flooded! Grace's stomach dropped. I'm on my way. She hung up, looking at Thomas apologetically. I have to go, my studio. I'll drive you. He was already grabbing keys. Come on. As they rushed out, Grace realized that whatever had almost happened in Thomas's kitchen would have to wait. But the fact that he didn't hesitate to help, that he'd dropped everything without question, told her everything she needed to know. She was falling for Thomas Ashford, and there was absolutely nothing professional about it anymore. The studio looked like a disaster film set. Water covered the floor, soaking through motivational posters and client files. Martin stood in the middle of it all, holding a soggy purple scarf and looking devastated. It's ruined, he said dramatically. Everything's ruined. Grace assessed the damage with a sinking heart. Her books, her files, the cheerful yellow walls now stained with watermarks. This wasn't just her business. This was 5 years of building something from nothing. "The insurance will cover it," she said, trying to sound optimistic. "We'll rebuild." "With what money while we wait?" Martin's voice cracked. "Grace, we have appointments booked, clients depending on us. How are we supposed to—" "You'll use my office." Grace and Martin turned to stare at Thomas, who stood in the doorway surveying the damage with the analytical expression she'd come to recognize as his problem-solving mode. "What?" Grace asked. "I have an entire floor at my headquarters that's barely used. Conference rooms, private offices, equipment. You can operate from there while repairs happen here." He pulled out his phone, already typing. "I'll have my facilities manager set it up. You can be operational by tomorrow morning." "Thomas, we can't just—" "Why not?" He looked genuinely confused. "I have resources you need. You need space to work. This is logical. It's also incredibly generous," Grace said softly. "It's practical." But his ears had gone slightly red, which Grace was learning meant he was embarrassed by genuine emotion. Martin looked between them, mascara slightly smudged from stress crying. "Are we sure he's human? Because this level of efficiency in crisis situations seems suspiciously robotic." "I'm standing right here," Thomas said. "I know. That's why I said it." Martin managed a watery smile. "But thank you. Seriously. This is really kind." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to being called kind. "I'll make calls. Start the arrangements." He stepped into the hallway, phone already to his ear. Martin immediately grabbed Grace's arm. "That man is in love with you." "Martin, no, listen, I've seen romantic comedies. I've performed in romantic comedies. I know the signs." He gestured toward the door. "He just offered you his entire office building without hesitation. That's not professionalism, that's devotion. Or just efficiency," Grace argued weakly. "Grace, darling, brilliant woman." Martin held her shoulders. "When are you going to admit you feel the same way?" Grace looked at the water-damaged studio, at her ruined files, at the chaos of her carefully controlled life flooding away. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "What if I'm reading everything wrong? What if he's just being nice and I'm projecting? What if you're both stubborn idiots who are perfect for each other and you're wasting time being scared?" Martin interrupted. "Grace, I love you, but you coach people through their relationship fears every day. Maybe it's time to take your own advice." Thomas returned before she could respond. "Done. Facilities manager is preparing space now. We can move essential items tonight." "Tonight?" Grace blinked. "Unless you prefer to wait until morning?" He looked uncertain. "I assumed faster was better, but if I'm overstepping—" "No." Grace smiled, feeling something warm unfold in her chest. "Tonight is perfect. Thank you." So it's to Seaway. By midnight, they'd transported what they could salvage to Ashford Aviation's headquarters. Thomas's facilities manager, a cheerful woman named Diane, who seemed completely unfazed by the late-night request, had set up a temporary studio space that was somehow better than Grace's original. "Your boss is very thorough," Grace told her as Diane showed them the conference room setup. "Mr. Ashford is particular about details." Diane smiled knowingly. "Though I've never seen him personally help with furniture arrangement before. That's new." Grace glanced over at Thomas, who was indeed helping Martin position a desk, his suit jacket discarded and sleeves rolled up. He looked focused and slightly sweaty, and completely unlike the rigid businessman she'd met weeks ago. "He's changed," Grace murmured. "He has," Diane agreed. "We've all noticed. He actually said good morning to someone in the elevator last week. Nearly caused a panic." Grace laughed. "Whatever you're doing," Diane said quietly, "keep doing it. It's good for him." She left, and Grace stood there feeling the weight of that statement, the responsibility of it, the terrifying possibility that she mattered to Thomas as much as he was starting to matter to her. "I think that's everything," Martin announced, collapsing dramatically into a chair. "I'm exhausted, emotionally drained, physically depleted. I need rest, and possibly therapy." "You can go home," Grace told him. "Thomas and I can finish up." Martin's eyebrows shot up. "Thomas and you? Alone? In a private office? At midnight?" "Martin, just making an observation." He gathered his things with exaggerated slowness. A purely neutral, non-judgmental observation about two people with obvious chemistry being left alone in a romantic setting. It's an office building, not a romantic setting. Everything is romantic if you have the right attitude. Martin kissed her cheek. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, which, to be clear, leaves you with very few restrictions. He swept out, leaving Grace alone with Thomas among the half-unpacked boxes. He's subtle, Thomas said dryly. He's Martin. Grace started organizing files. Thank you again for this. I don't know how we would have managed otherwise. You would have figured something out. You're resourceful. Maybe. But having help is... She paused, surprised to feel tears threatening. It's nice, not having to figure everything out alone. Thomas set down the box he was holding. Grace? I'm fine. She wiped her eyes quickly. It's just been a long day, and the adrenaline's wearing off and I'm tired. Come here. He said it so simply, arms opening slightly. An invitation, not a demand. Grace surprised herself by walking right into his embrace. Thomas's arms closed around her, warm and solid and steadier than she expected. He smelled like cedar and coffee and something uniquely him. She felt his heart beating under her cheek, fast but steady. Is this okay? He asked quietly. I'm attempting comfort. Martin said I'm terrible at it, but I wanted to try. Grace laughed against his chest. You're not terrible. That's a relief. His hand moved to her hair, hesitant. Your hair is very soft. That's not relevant. I'm just noticing. You can notice. I don't mind. They stood there in the middle of his conference room surrounded by boxes, holding each other. Grace felt the tension of the day finally releasing. Felt safe in a way she hadn't in hours. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. The space, the help, She pulled back slightly to look at him. The being here. Thomas looked down at her and Grace saw something shift in his expression, something vulnerable and raw and utterly genuine. Grace, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart stuttered. Okay. I'm not good at this. At feelings. At knowing when to speak and when to wait. He took a breath. But my grandmother was right. I think about you constantly. Your opinion matters more than anyone else's, and I want to be better because you make me believe I can be. Grace's breath caught. Thomas, I'm not finished. His hands were still on her waist, steady despite the tremor in his voice. Earlier, at my flat, I almost kissed you. And I've regretted that smoke alarm ever since. But I'm glad we were interrupted because I realized something. What? When I kiss you, and I very much want to kiss you, I want it to be right. Not rushed because of burnt pasta, not interrupted by emergencies, just right. He paused. Is that too calculated? Should I be more spontaneous? Grace's heart was doing acrobatics. No, that's perfect. Really, really. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble there. Though for the record, I wanted you to kiss me too, smoke alarm and all. His eyes darkened. That's good to know. Is it? Very good. He leaned down slightly, and Grace's pulse went into overdrive. But I meant what I said. When I kiss you, I want to do it properly. And this isn't proper. This is midnight in my office building. You're exhausted and stressed and vulnerable. That's not fair to you. Grace stared at him. This impossible, thoughtful, utterly frustrating man. Has anyone ever told you you overthink things? Frequently. Well, they're right. But she smiled. Though I appreciate the consideration. You're welcome. He stepped back, though he looked like it cost him. I should drive you home. It's late. You don't have to. I want to. Simple. Direct. Please let me. Grace nodded, gathering her things. As they left the building, London stretched out before them, lights reflecting on wet streets, the city settling into its quiet hours. Thomas's car was warm and comfortable, classical music playing softly. Can I ask you something? Grace said as they drove. Always. When you first hired me, what did you really think would happen? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I thought you'd teach me some techniques. I'd become marginally less terrible at social interaction, and that would be that. And now, he glanced at her, and even in the dim light she could see the honesty in his expression. Now I can't imagine my life without you in it, and that terrifies me more than any business negotiation ever has. Grace's throat tightened. That terrifies me too. Good. He reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. At least we're terrified together. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands linked. When they reached Grace's flat, Thomas walked her to the door. "Thank you," she said, "for everything today." "You're welcome." He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her forehead, just like he had in his kitchen. "Sleep well, Grace." She watched him walk back to his car, feeling like something significant had shifted between them, like they were standing on the edge of something wonderful and terrifying. And for once in her carefully planned life, Grace was ready to jump. Grace should have known something was wrong when Nana texted her at 7 a.m. "Yoga class today. 10 a.m. My house. You're coming. Non-negotiable." "And it's a trap," Martin said, when Grace showed him the text over breakfast at the temporary studio. "Obviously a trap. It's yoga. With Nana Ashford, that woman doesn't do anything without ulterior motives." Martin sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Though I suppose it could be harmless elderly exercise." Grace's phone buzzed again. "Thomas will be there too. He needs to learn flexibility, in multiple ways." Definitely a trap," Martin confirmed. But Grace went anyway, because apparently her judgment had completely abandoned her where the Ashford family was concerned. Nana's living room had been transformed into a makeshift yoga studio. Mats were arranged in a circle, incense burned in the corner, and Nana stood at the center wearing a hot pink yoga outfit that was somehow both age-appropriate and vaguely threatening. "Grace, darling," Nana embraced her. "I'm so glad you came. Thomas should be here any moment. He tried to cancel, but I told him I'd revoke his inheritance. You can't do that. He doesn't know that." Nana winked. The doorbell rang. Thomas appeared, looking like a man facing execution in athletic wear. Grace had never seen him in anything but suits. The sight of him in fitted track pants and a simple t-shirt that showed off shoulders she'd only imagined was problematic. "Gran," Thomas said flatly, "this is manipulation. This is wellness." Nana gestured to the mats. "Now both of you positions. We're starting with partner poses." "Partner poses," Thomas repeated slowly. "Yes, you'll work together, build trust, improve flexibility." Nana's eyes gleamed. "It's very therapeutic." Grace and Thomas exchanged glances. His expression said, "I'm sorry." Hers said, "We're going to survive this." "First position," Nana announced, pulling up a video on her iPad. "Partner forward fold. Grace, you bend forward. Thomas, you press gently on her back to help her stretch." Grace bent forward, feeling immediately vulnerable. Then Thomas's hands were on her back, warm, careful, respectful, and her brain short-circuited. "Like this?" Thomas asked, his voice closer than expected. "Perfect," Nana said. "Now hold for 30 seconds. Breathe together." Grace tried to breathe, failed spectacularly. Thomas's hands were solid and warm through her thin yoga top, and she could feel his breath near her neck, and this was torture disguised as exercise. "You're very tense," Thomas observed quietly. "I wonder why," she muttered. "If it helps, I'm also extremely uncomfortable." "It doesn't help." "Noted." "Next position," Nana called cheerfully. "Seated twist. Sit back to back. Link arms. Now twist in opposite directions." They rearranged themselves. Grace felt the solid warmth of Thomas's back against hers, the way their bodies aligned despite their height difference. She linked her arm through his, felt him do the same, and they twisted. "This feels like voluntary torture," Thomas said. "Agreed, though you're very warm." "Thomas." "Observation, just an observation." Behind them, Nana was taking photos. Definitely taking photos. "Gran, are you documenting this?" "For your wedding album, dear." "We're not," Thomas started. "Yet," Nana finished. "Now tree pose. Face each other. Hold hands for balance." They stood, facing each other, hands linked. Grace lifted one leg. Thomas mirrored her. They wobbled. "I'm going to fall," Grace said. "I've got you." Thomas's grip tightened. "Trust me." She did. They found their balance. Standing there on one leg, hands clasped, eyes locked. The room seemed to fade away. It was just them, balancing together, literally holding each other up. "You're good at this," Grace said softly. "I'm really not." I'm terrified of falling. Me too. Then we'll fall together. He smiled. Though preferably not, because I don't want to explain injuries to my board of directors. Grace laughed, wobbled, and they both toppled, straight into Nana's couch in a tangle of limbs. Graceful, Martin announced from the doorway, holding shopping bags. Very graceful. Martin. Grace extracted herself from Thomas's arms. What are you doing here? Nana invited me, said she needed witnesses. He set down the bags. Also, I brought lunch. This seems like the kind of event that requires emotional eating. Nana beamed. Excellent timing. Now final pose before we eat. The trust fall. Absolutely not, Thomas said immediately. Absolutely yes. Nana was immovable. Thomas, you'll catch Grace when she falls backward. Grace, you'll trust him completely. It's symbolic. It's dangerous, Thomas argued. Life is dangerous. Love is dangerous. Yoga is comparatively safe. Nana positioned them. Grace, stand here. Thomas, behind her. When she falls, catch her. Don't overthink it. Grace stood at the designated spot, very aware of Thomas behind her. Her heart was hammering. I don't know about this, she said. Neither do I. Thomas's voice was close. But I promise I'll catch you. Promise. I promise. Grace took a breath, closed her eyes, and let herself fall backward. For one heart-stopping moment, she was suspended in nothing. No control, no certainty, just faith that Thomas would be there. Then his arms caught her, solid and sure, and she was safe. Grace opened her eyes to find Thomas looking down at her, his face inches from hers, his arms cradling her weight like it was nothing. Told you, he said softly. I've got you. Always this dramatic, she whispered back. Only with you. Martin applauded. Nana wiped her eyes. Grace realized she was still in Thomas's arms and made no move to leave them. That, Nana declared, is what love looks like. Trust, catch. Faith that someone will be there when you fall. Gran, Thomas warned, but he didn't let go of Grace. Oh, hush, I'm old. I'm allowed to be sentimental. She headed toward the kitchen. Now lunch. Martin brought those little sandwiches from Harrods, the expensive ones. Martin followed her, shooting Grace a meaningful look over his shoulder. Thomas helped Grace stand, but his hands lingered on her arms. Thank you, she said, for catching me. Always. He paused. I mean that. Not just in yoga. In general, if you fall, I'll catch you. Grace's throat tightened. That's very romantic for someone who claims not to understand romance. I'm learning from an excellent teacher. Yeah? She stepped closer. How am I doing? You're... Thomas stopped, his eyes dropping to her lips, then back up. You're making this very difficult. What? Waiting, being patient, doing this right. His jaw was tight. You're standing very close and you look beautiful even in ridiculous yoga clothes, and all I can think about is that I promised myself I'd wait for the right moment. But every moment with you feels right. Grace's breath caught. Thomas! Lunch, Nana called from the kitchen. Before it gets cold. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Your grandmother has terrible timing, Grace said. My grandmother has perfect timing. She's preventing me from completely abandoning my plans for proper courtship. Who says I want proper courtship? His eyes darkened. Don't say things like that. Why not? Because I'm already barely maintaining control, and if you keep looking at me like that, I'm going to forget every rule I've set for myself. Grace smiled, feeling powerful. Maybe that's not a bad thing. It's a terrible thing. Because when I finally kiss you, Grace Hartley, I want to do it somewhere better than my grandmother's living room with Martin filming in the next room. He's not filming. He's definitely filming. Lunch! Nana bellowed. Or I'm eating all the sandwiches myself. They broke apart, laughing. But as they headed to the kitchen, Thomas caught Grace's hand. Soon, he promised quietly. Soon, she agreed. And Grace realized she was already falling, had been falling for weeks. The only question was whether Thomas would be there to catch her when she finally hit the ground. Based on the yoga incident, she was starting to believe he would. Thomas had attended hundreds of corporate events. Black tie galas were routine. Schmoozing with investors was practically in his job description. But attending one with Grace as his date, not his coach, not his consultant, but his actual date, had him reconsidering every decision that led to this moment. Stop fidgeting, Grace said beside him in the car. She looked devastating in a deep green dress that made her eyes look almost black. Her hair was swept up, exposing her neck in a way that made him want to, "I'm not fidgeting, I'm adjusting." "You've adjusted your cufflinks 6 times in the last minute. They're uneven. They're perfect." She reached over and stilled his hands with hers. "Thomas, breathe. This is supposed to be fun." "Fun." He tested the word like it was foreign. "Right. Fun, I can do fun. That sounds convincing. I'm terrible at this." "You're not terrible, you're nervous." Grace squeezed his hand. "Which is actually adorable, though don't let it go to your head." Thomas looked at her, really looked. She was smiling that soft smile he'd come to recognize as her genuine one, not her professional one. The smile she saved for moments when she forgot to maintain distance. "You're staring," she said. "You're beautiful." Grace's cheeks flushed pink. "That's direct. I'm done being indirect." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Is that all right?" "That's very all right." The car pulled up to the venue, a historic hotel in Belgravia, dripping with old money and older traditions. Thomas helped Grace out, his hand on the small of her back, and tried to ignore how right it felt. Inside, the gala was everything he expected. Champagne, string quartet, important people saying important things about things that weren't actually important. He'd navigated these events for years, but having Grace beside him changed everything. She made him notice things he usually ignored, the way the violinist swayed with the music, the elaborate ice sculpture slowly melting, the older couple dancing like they were the only people in the room. "You're doing it again," Grace murmured. "What?" "Observing. Like you're cataloguing everything for later analysis." "Old habit." He grabbed 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter, handed her one. "Though lately I find myself observing you more than anything else." "Is that so?" "You bite your lip when you're thinking. You twist your ring when you're nervous. You laugh differently depending on whether something is politely amusing or genuinely funny." He paused. "And right now you're looking at me like I've said something significant." "That's because you have." Grace sipped her champagne. "Most people go their entire lives without really seeing each other. You see everything." "Not everything. I still don't understand why you wear heels when they obviously hurt your feet." Grace laughed, her genuine laugh. "Because they make me feel powerful." "You're already powerful." "Thomas Ashford." She shook her head, smiling. "When did you become such a flirt?" "I'm not flirting, I'm stating observable facts." "That's what makes it effective." They were interrupted by a loud voice. "Ashford, there you are." Thomas suppressed a groan. Gerald Whitmore, the wine incident victim, was bearing down on them with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already had too much champagne. "Whitmore," Thomas acknowledged, "heard you close that Tokyo deal." "Impressive." Gerald's eyes slid to Grace with obvious interest. "And who's this lovely creature?" Grace stiffened. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "Grace Hartley," she introduced herself smoothly. "Communication consultant." "Consultant." Gerald's smile was oily. "How professional." "Though you look far too attractive to be consulting on anything as boring as communication." Thomas stepped slightly in front of Grace. "Whitmore, that's a compliment," Gerald protested. "Can't a man appreciate beauty anymore?" "You can appreciate it respectfully," Thomas said, his voice cold in a way that made several nearby people glance over. "Or you can leave." "Ashford, come on. Don't be so sensitive." Gerald reached for Grace's arm. "How about a dance, love? I can show you how we do things in the—" Thomas caught Gerald's wrist before it made contact. "Don't touch her." The room seemed to quiet. Grace's eyes had gone wide. "Thomas," she said softly, "it's fine. It's not fine." He released Gerald's wrist with barely controlled force. "Whitmore, apologize to Miss Hartley and leave. Now." Gerald's face had gone red. "Who do you think you are?" "I'm the man she's with." Thomas's voice was deadly calm. "And I'm the man who controls a significant portion of the aviation contracts you need for your European expansion. So I suggest you apologize, sincerely." The threat hung in the air. Gerald looked between them, calculation replacing his bluster. "My apologies, Ms. Hartley, I was inappropriate." He scurried away. The crowd slowly returned to their conversations. Thomas stood there, adrenaline flooding his system, realizing he'd just made a very public scene. "I'm sorry." he said to Grace. That was unprofessional. I shouldn't have. Grace grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the exit. Where are we going? Somewhere private before you cause an international incident. She led him through the hotel, down a hallway, and into a small courtyard garden that was blessedly empty. The music from inside was muffled. Fairy lights twinkled overhead. Grace, I'm sorry, Thomas started. I know I said I'd learned control, but when he tried to touch you, I just... Thank you. He stopped. What? Thank you. Grace turned to face him, her eyes bright. For defending me, for not tolerating that behavior, for being protective without being patronizing. I threatened his business contracts. That's not exactly mature. No, but it was effective, she smiled. And kind of hot, honestly. Thomas's brain stuttered. Hot. Very hot. Grace stepped closer. You went all protective alpha male. It was impressive. I was angry. He had no right to speak to you that way. No, he didn't. And you made sure he knew it. She looked up at him, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression, something heated. Thomas, can I ask you something? Anything. Why are we still pretending this is just you being my client? His heart stopped. Grace? Because I don't think that's what this is anymore. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, jasmine and something sweeter. I think this is you and me, dancing around something we both want but are too scared to reach for. I'm not scared. Yes, you are. So am I. Her hand came up to rest on his chest. But I'm tired of waiting for the perfect moment. They don't exist. Life is messy and complicated and full of burnt pasta and smoke alarms. Thomas caught her hand, held it against his racing heart. What are you saying? I'm saying kiss me. Grace looked up at him, vulnerable and brave and absolutely perfect. Stop planning it, stop analyzing it, just kiss me. Grace, his voice was rough, if I kiss you now, everything changes. Good. I want everything to change. I'm not good at spontaneity. Then be bad at it. She smiled. I don't need perfect, Thomas. I just need you. Something in him broke. Or maybe it was something finally falling into place. Thomas cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Tell me if I do this wrong. There's no wrong way to... He kissed her. Finally, after weeks of waiting and wanting and trying to be patient, Thomas Ashford kissed Grace Hartley. It wasn't smooth or practiced. His angle was slightly off at first, and he had to adjust. But then Grace's arms wrapped around his neck, and she made a small sound that destroyed any coherent thought, and suddenly nothing else mattered. She tasted like champagne and promises. Her lips were soft and responsive, moving against his with a certainty he didn't possess but desperately wanted to learn. When her fingers threaded through his hair, Thomas pulled her closer, one hand sliding to the small of her back, the other cradling her neck. Grace pulled back just enough to breathe. That was terrible? Thomas asked, slightly panicked. I haven't done this in years, and I'm sure I'm... Perfect. She cut him off, laughing breathlessly. That was absolutely perfect. Really? Really? She kissed him again, softer this time, though maybe we could practice, for quality assurance purposes. Quality assurance. He smiled against her lips. Very professional. I'm extremely professional. You're completely unprofessional. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. And I'm completely in love with you. Grace went still. What? Thomas pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I'm in love with you. Have been for weeks, probably. Maybe since that first session when you challenged me and looked at me like I was a puzzle you wanted to solve. He took a shaky breath. I know it's fast. I know it's probably terrifying. I know I'm not... Grace kissed him hard, effectively silencing his spiral. I love you too, she whispered against his mouth. You impossible, analytical, wonderful man. I love you too. Thomas felt something expand in his chest. Joy, relief, terror, elation, all mixed into something he couldn't analyze or quantify. So he stopped trying. He just kissed her again, there in the garden with fairy lights overhead and the distant sound of music from inside. Kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. Kissed her like he'd wanted to since the moment she'd looked at him in her bright yellow studio and told him he could learn to be human. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace was laughing. What? Thomas asked. Your grandmother is going to be insufferable when she finds out. She probably already knows. She has cameras everywhere. That's terrifying. That's Nana. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Should we go back inside? Or, Grace said slowly, we could leave. Go somewhere quiet. Talk. Continue this quality assurance testing. That's highly unprofessional. I thought we established I'm unprofessional now. Thomas smiled, really smiled. Let's go. They left the gala hand in hand, leaving behind champagne and expectations and the last remnants of who Thomas had been before Grace Hartley walked into his life. The man leaving that garden was different. He was someone who believed in things that couldn't be measured, someone who knew that the best moments in life were the unplanned ones, someone who was absolutely, terrifyingly, wonderfully in love. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Thomas Ashford was completely fine with that. Grace woke up to 17 missed calls from Martin and a text that simply said, "Emergency. Call me. Now." She sat up in her bed, heart racing, trying to remember if she'd forgotten something important. Then she saw the second text. Never mind. Saw Nana's Instagram. "You kissed him." Grace groaned and fell back against her pillows. Of course Nana had posted something. The woman was 82 going on 22 when it came to social media. Her phone rang. "Martin." "I can explain," Grace answered. "Explain?" Martin's voice was at least 3 octaves higher than normal. "Grace Hartley, you kissed Thomas Ashford at a gala, left early and didn't call me. I'm your best friend. I deserve live updates. It happened last night. I was going to tell you. Nana posted a photo. You're both in a garden. He's holding your face. Grace, you look like you're in a romance novel. The comments are going wild." Grace sat up again, now fully awake. "She posted what?" "Check Instagram. She tagged you both. The caption says, 'Finally,' with about 50 heart emojis." Grace pulled up Instagram with shaking hands. There it was. A photo of her and Thomas in the garden, fairy lights glowing overhead, his hands cupping her face, her arms around his neck. The moment right before their first kiss. It was beautiful, intimate, private, and now had 3,147 likes and counting. "I'm going to kill your grandmother," Grace muttered. "Tell me everything first," Martin demanded. "Was it good?" "It looked good. He looks at you like you hung the moon." "Martin, did you go home together? Did you—" "No, we just talked and kissed a lot." Grace couldn't help but smile. "He said he loves me." Martin screamed, actually screamed. "And I said it back," Grace continued. "And then we went to his flat and sat on his couch and talked until 3 a.m. about everything and nothing. And Martin, he's perfect. He's completely imperfect and analytical and awkward, and I'm completely in love with him." "I knew it," Martin said smugly. "I called this weeks ago. I'm an emotional genius." "You're an emotional disaster. A disaster who was right." A pause. "So what happens now?" Grace lay back down, staring at her ceiling. "I have no idea. This is completely unprofessional. I should probably end our coaching relationship, but I don't want to. I want—" Her doorbell rang. "Hold on," Grace told Martin. She padded to the door in her pajamas, ratty sleep shorts and an oversized jumper, and opened it. Thomas stood there holding 2 coffee cups and a bag from her favorite bakery. He looked tired and rumpled, and absolutely gorgeous. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she breathed. "I know it's early, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about last night, and I wanted to see you, and I thought maybe you'd want coffee and pastries, though I realize I'm possibly being too forward and should have texted first." Grace pulled him inside and kissed him. Thomas made a surprised sound, juggled the coffee and pastries, then managed to kick the door closed while kissing her back. When they broke apart, he was smiling. "Good morning to you too." "Grace!" Martin's voice shrieked from the phone she'd dropped on the floor. "Is that Thomas? Is he there?" Grace picked up her phone. "I'll call you later." "You better. I want details, all the details, except the really private ones. Actually, no, I want those too." She hung up and turned to Thomas, who was setting down the coffee and pastries with careful precision. "Sorry about the ambush," he said. I wanted to see you. I'm glad you're here." Grace took one of the coffee cups, noting it was exactly how she liked it. "How did you sleep?" "Terribly. I kept replaying everything in my head." He ran a hand through his hair, looking adorably uncertain. "Grace, about last night. I meant what I said, all of it. But I want to make sure you don't feel pressured or... Thomas. She set down her coffee and took his hands. I love you. That wasn't the champagne talking. That wasn't the moment. That was me, telling you what I've been feeling for weeks. His shoulders relaxed. Good. That's good. Though we do need to talk about your grandmother posting photos without permission. Thomas groaned. She didn't. She did. We're currently trending on her Instagram. I'm going to delete her account. You can't delete your grandmother's Instagram. Watch me. But he was smiling. Though I suppose the photo is quite nice. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. He pulled her closer. Even in ratty sleep shorts. These are not ratty. They have a hole in the left leg. That's character. Grace looped her arms around his neck. You're wearing sweatpants. I didn't think you owned sweatpants. I own 2 pairs, for emergencies. Is this an emergency? You tell me. Thomas's expression turned serious. Grace, I know this complicates things. Your business, your reputation, the ethics of dating a former client. If you want to wait or take things slowly or... I don't want to wait. She said it firmly. I'm done waiting. We'll figure out the professional complications. We'll navigate the ethics. But Thomas, I'm not giving this up. I'm not giving you up. Something in his expression cracked. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything. She kissed him softly. And I'm going to spend a very long time proving that to you. They stood there in her tiny flat, holding each other while London woke up outside. Grace's phone kept buzzing with notifications. Martin, Nana, clients who'd apparently seen the Instagram post. But none of it mattered. Can I take you to breakfast? Thomas asked. Properly, as your boyfriend, not your client. Boyfriend. Grace tested the word. That sounds terribly official. I'm a terribly official person. You're a terribly wonderful person. She kissed him again because she could, because he was here, in her flat, looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. But first, pastries. You brought pastries from Laurent's, and I'm not letting those go to waste. They settled on her small couch, coffees in hand, sharing pastries like it was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas told her about his sleepless night, about the 17 different ways he'd planned to tell her how he felt. Grace told him about Martin's reaction, about her own fears and hopes. So what happens now? Thomas asked eventually. With us, with your business. Well, Grace considered. First, I'm officially ending our coaching relationship. As of now, you're no longer my client. Understood. Second, I'm going to explain to my other clients that we've developed a personal relationship and offer them the option to continue with me or transfer to another coach. That's very professional. I try. She smiled. Third, I'm going to date you properly. No more pretending it's professional. No more boundaries that don't make sense. And fourth, Thomas prompted. Fourth, I'm going to kiss you again. She suited action to words. And possibly never stop. Thomas made that sound again, the one that suggested she was destroying his composure. Grace, if you keep doing that, we're going to miss breakfast. You always care about breakfast. You've told me 3 times that it's the most important meal of the day. Maybe you're more important than breakfast. His eyes darkened. That's a significant statement. I'm a significant person. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Grace groaned. If that's Martin, I'm not answering. It's not Martin, a familiar voice called through the door. It's Nana, and I brought champagne. Grace and Thomas looked at each other. She brought champagne, Grace said, at 9 a.m. She's celebrating, Thomas replied. This is actually restrained for her. Grace opened the door. Nana swept in, holding not just champagne but also flowers, a box of chocolates and what appeared to be wedding magazines. Darlings, she embraced them both. I'm so proud. Thomas, you finally grew a spine and told the girl you love her. Grace, you finally admitted you're human and can have feelings for your clients. Former client, Grace corrected. Same thing. Nana set down her bounty and pulled out her phone. Now smile. I need content. Gran, no more photos, Thomas protested. Too late. Already posted the garden kiss. Got 5,000 likes. I'm practically an influencer now. You're a menace. I'm a grandmother who wants to see her grandson happy. Nana's expression softened. And Thomas, darling, you look happier than I've seen you in 36 years. So yes, I'm posting photos. Deal with it. Thomas looked at Grace helplessly. She just laughed. "Welcome to my life," Grace told him, "where nothing is private and everyone has opinions." "I'm reconsidering this relationship," Thomas deadpanned. "No, you're not," Nana said. "You're completely smitten. It's adorable. Now let's discuss the wedding." "Wedding?" Grace and Thomas said in unison. "I'm 82. I don't have time to waste." Nana opened one of the wedding magazines. "I'm thinking spring. Maybe the Cotswolds. Something elegant but not stuffy. Thomas, you can wear your navy suit, the one that makes you look less robotic. Don't gran me. I've waited long enough for this." She looked between them with sparkling eyes. "Besides, you two are perfect together. He needs someone to teach him about feelings. You need someone to teach you that not everything requires professional distance." Grace felt tears threatening. "Nana, that's actually really sweet." "I have my moments." Nana squeezed her hand. "Now, who wants champagne mimosas? I make them with fresh orange juice, very fancy." As Nana bustled into Grace's kitchen like she owned it, Thomas pulled Grace close. "I'm sorry about her," he whispered. "Don't be." Grace leaned into him. "She's wonderful. Intrusive and slightly terrifying, but wonderful. She's already planning our wedding. I noticed. We've been together less than 12 hours. Also noticed." Thomas pulled back to look at her. "Does that scare you?" Grace considered this. Considered the fact that she was standing in her flat with a man she'd met weeks ago, his grandmother in her kitchen making mimosas, wedding magazines on her coffee table. It should scare her. It should be too much, too fast, too everything. But it wasn't. "No," she said honestly. "It doesn't scare me at all." Thomas's smile was slow and genuine, and completely transformed his face. "Good, because I'm already imagining you in a wedding dress, and I'm supposed to be the practical one." "You're imagining me in a wedding dress?" "I'm imagining you in everything and nothing." He went red. "That came out wrong. I meant—" Grace kissed him, laughing. "I know what you meant." "Mimosas," Nana called from the kitchen. They joined her, and Grace realized this was her life now. Intrusive grandmothers, premature wedding planning, falling in love with impossible men who learned to be possible. It was chaotic and ridiculous and absolutely perfect. And Grace Hartley, professional communication coach and author of a book about boundaries, couldn't imagine it any other way. 3 months had passed since that first kiss in the garden. 3 months of Thomas learning what it meant to be in love, which, he'd discovered, meant a lot of burnt dinners, strategic placement of poetry books he still didn't entirely understand, and getting used to Martin's constant presence in their lives. "You're overthinking this," Martin said, watching Thomas pace in the temporary studio space. "Just ask her. It's not that simple. It literally is. Grace, will you marry me? See? Simple." Thomas stopped pacing. "What if she says no?" "She won't say no. That woman looks at you like you invented oxygen." Martin adjusted the purple scarf that had become his signature. "Though I do have concerns about your proposal plan." "What's wrong with my plan?" "Thomas, darling, you've created a PowerPoint presentation titled Logical Reasons Why We Should Get Married. That's what's wrong. It has graphs." "I know it has graphs. That's the problem." Martin threw up his hands dramatically. "You can't propose with data visualization." "Why not? Grace appreciates thorough analysis. She appreciates romantic gestures, spontaneity, not a cost-benefit analysis of matrimony." Thomas pulled out his laptop. "But look at slide 7. I've outlined our compatibility metrics across 15 different categories." Martin looked at the ceiling. "Grace, wherever you are, I'm so sorry. I tried." The door opened. Grace walked in carrying lunch, and Thomas immediately closed his laptop like it contained state secrets. "What are you two arguing about?" she asked, setting down the bags. "Nothing," Thomas said quickly. "Thomas's complete inability to understand romance," Martin said simultaneously. Grace looked between them, suspicious. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet," Martin muttered. "But he's planning something terrible, and I can't stop him." "I'm not planning anything terrible." "You're planning something, though?" Grace moved closer, and Thomas felt his carefully constructed composure crumbling. She did that to him, just by existing in his space. "Thomas?" He looked at Martin helplessly. "I'm leaving," Martin announced. "I can't watch this train wreck in real time. Grace, I love you. Thomas, God help you." He swept out, leaving them alone. Grace settled onto the edge of the desk. So, what are you planning? Thomas had rehearsed this 17 times, had bullet points, had backup plans for the backup plans, but standing there with Grace looking at him with those dark eyes that saw through every defense he'd ever built, all his preparation evaporated. I want to ask you something, he said, but Martin says my approach is wrong. What approach? The logical one. Grace's lips twitched. Of course. What did you want to ask? Thomas pulled out his laptop, opened it, showed her the PowerPoint. Grace stared at the screen. Logical reasons why we should get married. She read the title slowly. Thomas, are you? Slide 3 covers financial benefits. Slide 7 has compatibility metrics. Slide 12 addresses potential counter-arguments. He was talking too fast, he knew but couldn't stop. I've created a comprehensive analysis of why marriage between us makes sense from every measurable standpoint. Grace was very quiet. That's terrible, she said finally. That's possibly the least romantic thing I've ever seen. Thomas's heart sank. I know. Martin said the same thing. I wanted to show you that I've thought about this, that it's not impulsive or irrational, that there are legitimate reasons why we'd be successful partners in a legal commitment. Thomas, Grace slid off the desk, moved toward him. Do you love me? Yes, obviously. That's covered in slide 4 under emotional factors. And do you want to spend your life with me? Yes, that's the entire thesis of the presentation. Then ask me. She took his hands. Forget the slides. Forget the data. Just ask me. Thomas looked at her, this brilliant, patient, impossible woman who'd taken his carefully controlled world and turned it into something messy and wonderful, who'd taught him that feelings weren't problems to solve, but experiences to embrace, who loved him despite his spreadsheets and his awkwardness and his complete inability to be spontaneous. I had a ring, he admitted. It's in my jacket pocket. I was going to show you the presentation first, then produce the ring during the conclusion slide. Of course you were. But now I'm realizing that was probably wrong. Probably. And I should just ask. That would be good. Thomas reached into his pocket with shaking hands, pulled out the small velvet box, opened it to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond. Elegant, classic, nothing ostentatious. I'm terrible at this, he said, at being romantic, at spontaneity, at knowing what to say without rehearsing it 17 times first. I know. And I'm probably going to mess up constantly. Forget anniversaries, plan dates using efficiency algorithms, accidentally insult your mother. I don't doubt it. But Grace, he took a breath. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You make me want to be better, braver, more human. And I know it's only been 3 months. And Martin says I'm rushing, and Gran says I should have asked sooner, and I have no idea what the appropriate timeline is, but... Yes, Thomas stopped. What? Yes, I'll marry you. Grace was crying and laughing simultaneously. Even though you made a PowerPoint, even though you probably have backup slides. Yes, really, really. She pulled him down for a kiss. Though I am going to make fun of those slides forever. That's fair. Thomas managed to get the ring out of the box without dropping it, a miracle given how much his hands were shaking, and slid it onto her finger. It fits. Did you measure my finger while I was sleeping? I may have borrowed one of your other rings and taken it to a jeweler. That's either creepy or romantic. I can't decide which. Both, Thomas suggested. Definitely both. Grace held up her hand, watching the diamond catch the light. It's perfect, you're perfect, even with your terrible proposal presentation. I put a lot of work into that presentation. I know you did. She kissed him again. And that's actually kind of sweet, in a very you way. The door burst open. Martin rushed in, followed by Nana, both carrying champagne. We were listening at the door, Martin announced. And that was simultaneously the worst and best proposal I've ever witnessed. You said yes? Nana demanded, though she was already popping the champagne. I said yes, Grace confirmed, showing off the ring. Nana shrieked, actually shrieked, and pulled them both into a hug that was surprisingly strong for an 82-year-old. Finally, I can die happy now. You're not dying, Gran. Not immediately, no, but I am planning your wedding, starting tomorrow. Tomorrow? Thomas repeated weakly. I have a binder. Nana produced it from seemingly nowhere. I've been preparing for months, Martin gasped. Is that color-coded? By priority level. Nana opened it to reveal tabs, notes, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline. We're looking at spring, the Cotswolds, approximately 200 guests. 200. Grace's eyes widened. I have a lot of friends, and enemies who need to see my grandson succeed. Nana was already flipping through pages. Now about the dress. I'm thinking something elegant. No blue. I saw that note you made in your phone, Grace. You've been reading my notes. I'm thorough. Nana smiled wickedly. Just like my grandson. Thomas looked at Grace, who was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. This was his life now. Interfering grandmothers, dramatic best friends, wedding planning that started before he'd even finished proposing. It was chaotic, uncontrolled, nothing like the organized existence he'd carefully constructed. And it was absolutely perfect. Champagne, Martin declared, pouring glasses. To the happy couple, and to Thomas finally understanding that love requires more than graphs. The graphs were helpful, Thomas protested. The graphs were a disaster, Grace corrected. But she was smiling. But you're my disaster now. Legally binding disaster, Thomas agreed. Assuming you don't change your mind before the actual wedding. Not a chance. Grace held up her glass. You're stuck with me. Spreadsheets and all. They toasted. To love, to chaos, to the unlikely pairing of a communication coach and a billionaire who'd learned that the best things in life couldn't be optimized. And Thomas Ashford, who'd spent his entire life believing in data over emotion, realized that sometimes the most important calculations couldn't be quantified. Sometimes you just had to feel. And God, did he feel everything. The wedding had been perfect chaos, exactly as expected, with Nana orchestrating and Martin serving as the world's most dramatic best man. Grace had worn ivory silk, simple and elegant, and Thomas had cried during his vows. Actually cried, which made half the guests cry, which made Martin sob so loudly he had to be given tissues by 3 different people. Now they were alone. Thomas's flat, their flat now, Grace reminded herself, was quiet after the whirlwind of the reception. They'd sent everyone home, politely declined Nana's offer to help them settle in, and stood in the living room in their wedding clothes, suddenly shy. Hi, Grace said. Hi. Thomas loosened his tie, looking uncertain. That was perfect, she finished. Completely perfect. I forgot half my vows. Had to improvise. The improvised parts were the best parts. Grace moved closer, reaching up to help him with his tie. You said I was the answer to questions you didn't know you had. That was beautiful. It was true. His hands settled on her waist, careful and reverent. Grace, You're nervous, she observed gently. Terrified, he admitted. I want this to be perfect. You deserve perfect, and I'm worried I'll... Grace kissed him, soft and slow. When she pulled back, Thomas's eyes had darkened in that way that made her stomach flip. It's me, she whispered. Just me. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be us. Us. He smiled slightly. I like us. Good. Because you married us. She took his hand, led him toward the bedroom. Come on, let's figure this out together. The bedroom was soft with lamplight. Grace had been here before, of course, had stayed over, had fallen asleep in Thomas's arms watching terrible movies that Nana recommended. But this was different. This was their wedding night. This was the beginning of everything they'd promised each other. Thomas touched her face gently, tracing the line of her jaw. You're so beautiful, he said quietly. I know I tell you that constantly, but Grace, you take my breath away. You take mine too. She reached for the buttons of his shirt, fingers steady even though her heart was racing. Is this okay? More than okay. He helped her, shrugging out of the shirt. Though I should warn you, I haven't... Thomas. Grace pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his racing heart. We're learning this together. Okay? Okay. She let him unzip her dress, felt it pool at her feet, saw his expression shift into something awed and tender. His hand skimmed her sides, barely touching, like she was something precious. You're shaking, she whispered. So are you. They were, both of them trembling with nerves and anticipation and the weight of this moment. Grace pulled him toward the bed, and they tumbled together, laughing slightly at their own awkwardness. "This is very uncoordinated," Thomas observed. "Extremely uncoordinated," Grace kissed him. "I don't care." What followed was tender and fumbling and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Thomas touched her like she was a miracle, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. He whispered her name like a prayer, told her she was beautiful so many times she lost count. Am I? He kept asking, nervous and careful. "Yes," Grace kept answering. "Perfect. You're perfect." When they finally came together, it was with soft laughter and breathless sighs and the overwhelming feeling of rightness. Thomas held her like she was the most important thing in his world, because she was. Grace had never felt more cherished, more seen, more loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Thomas tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That was," he started. "Worth waiting for," Grace finished, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Definitely worth waiting for. I love you." He said it simply, honestly. In case that wasn't clear from the previous activities, Grace laughed. "It was fairly clear, but I like hearing it anyway." "I love you," he repeated. "I'll probably say it too much." "That's not possible." They lay there as London settled into night outside their windows, wrapped in each other, and the knowledge that this was just the beginning. Grace stumbled into the kitchen at 3 a.m., exhausted and disheveled. Thomas was already there, holding one crying baby, while trying to warm a bottle with his free hand. "Mathematical probability says they should sleep occasionally," he said, bouncing their daughter Emma gently. "Yet empirical evidence suggests otherwise. Give me Oliver." Grace took their son, who immediately stopped crying and burped spectacularly on her shoulder. "Of course. They're conspiring against us. They're 3 months old. They can barely see us, let alone conspire. They're Ashfords. We conspire from birth." Grace laughed, exhausted but happy. The twins had arrived early, turning their carefully planned lives into beautiful chaos. Emma had Thomas's analytical stare. Oliver had Grace's smile. Both had inherited their great-grandmother's stubborn streak. Speaking of whom, the front door opened. Nana swept in, still in evening wear, holding what appeared to be takeaway from an expensive restaurant. "Why are you awake?" Thomas demanded. "Why are you awake?" Nana countered. "I brought leftovers from my date. That man from the yoga class finally asked me out. Took him long enough." "Gran, it's 3 a.m. I'm 83. I sleep when I'm dead." She took Oliver from Grace. "Go back to bed. Both of you, I've got this. You don't have to." "I want to." Nana settled into the rocking chair, Oliver already settling against her. "These two are the best thing that's happened to this family since you finally got your head out of your analytical behind and married this lovely girl." Grace leaned against Thomas, too tired to argue. Emma had fallen asleep against his chest. Oliver was snoring softly in Nana's arms. "Go," Nana commanded gently. "I'll wake you if World War III breaks out." They stumbled back to bed, collapsing together. "Our life is insane," Thomas murmured against Grace's hair. "Completely insane. I wouldn't change any of it. Not even the 3 a.m. wake-ups? Not even those." He kissed her forehead. "Though I am creating a sleep schedule optimization chart." "Of course you are. It has color coding." "Thomas." "I love you, charts and all." "I love you too, even though you think my charts are unnecessary." "They are unnecessary. They're helpful." Grace was already half asleep. "Whatever you say, darling." 6 months later, Martin's YouTube channel Relationship Disasters with Martin Clark had 300,000 subscribers. Nana had her own segment called If I'd Known Then What I Know Now, where she gave brutally honest relationship advice while doing yoga. The most popular video, That Time My Client Fell in Love with Me, a communication coach's guide to professional boundaries and how to ignore them. Grace and Thomas appeared as guest speakers. Thomas wore a tie that said, "I hearts my wife." Grace spent the entire interview laughing. The studio had been rebuilt, bigger and better. Martin ran it with theatrical flair. Grace consulted part-time, spending the rest of her days with the twins, who were now cheerfully destroying everything they could reach. Thomas had learned to be spontaneous, sort of. He still made charts for everything, but now they included categories like unexpected adventures and chaos management. On their first anniversary, they sat in that same garden where they'd first kissed. while Nana watched the twins and Martin live-streamed from an undisclosed location. "Do you remember when you walked into my studio?" Grace asked. "All rigid and proper and completely convinced emotions were inefficient. I was an idiot. You were lost." She squeezed his hand. "But you found your way. You found me," Thomas corrected, "and taught me that the best things in life can't be measured or analyzed." Very romantic for someone who made a PowerPoint proposal. "I stand by that presentation. It was thorough." Grace laughed, kissing him as the sun set over London. Life was messy and chaotic, and nothing like the controlled existence either of them had planned. The twins were crying somewhere in the distance. Martin was probably causing some social media disaster. Nana was undoubtedly planning another intervention. And Thomas and Grace sat in their garden holding hands, loving every ridiculous moment. Because love wasn't efficient or logical or optimizable, it was just perfect. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.